I'm Big Don Luca, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren. And today we are going to be getting into our NBA trade deadline primer. It was obviously not rudely, but it was disrupted by Kyrie Irving's joining of the Dallas Mavericks, a insane blockbuster move that obviously not came out of left field, but I think definitely, it's understandable that our plans were sort of led astray in that scenario. But today we're going to be getting into a lot of different trades that the Mavericks could do to shore up the rest of this roster. We're going to be looking at some of the different dynamics at play in terms of how they could maybe add some front court depth on the wing and maybe another rim protector. Specifically, we're going to look a lot at defense because that is one of the Mavericks' more pressing needs after the departure of Dorian Finney-Smith in this Kyrie Irving trade. The Mavericks do have some holes to be able to fill, even if they could have an all-time offense. There still are a lot of stop gaps that are preventing this team from definitely reaching a contender status right now. But, Jaren and I are both of the opinion that this team needs to go all in to an extent and empty the tank amidst everything happening. Just because, we don't know what's going to happen with Kyrie in the offseason. We just talked about that in our podcast where we dived even deeper into the intricacies of Kyrie's fit, dived into his relationship with Luka, dived into Kyrie's off-the-court stuff. If you guys are coming over from that podcast, we appreciate you guys because this is kind of a continuum of that. We decided to split up these two podcasts if you didn't catch the end of the other one, just because the Kyrie one was going a little longer than we thought, and we wanted to give you guys the optionality to kind of toggle through these, especially since the, one pertaining to this trade podcast and what the Mavericks might do in these next 48 hours is, definitely a lot different than us talking about the on and off court fit with Kyrie Irving on the Mavericks. So, with that being said, we're going to be getting into a lot of different fake trades, a lot of, theorizing some different teams that we could see the Mavericks dealing with. It's going to be a fun time. And we're really intrigued to see what the Mavericks do over the next 48 hours. If they do anything, we presume they will, but who knows at the end of the day. But before we do all of this, of course, here's an ad from our sponsor, Anchor, for you guys before we go ahead and get into this trade podcast. All right, Jaren, so getting into it here, we've identified a plethora of teams that we could see as potential trade partners for the Mavericks here. Not all these teams we have necessarily made fake trades for, because there may be we only made fake trades for the teams that there's kind of been like validity to the rumors, or there's been like at least like just a little bit of smoke there. A lot of these are maybe kind of just packages that but guys that we've theorized the Mavericks could trade for, but there's no actual credence to or in the media or anything that's been reported that anything could be actually happen there. So we operated kind of gingerly with that. But nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and hash out all the teams for everybody that we theorized the Mavericks could trade for, and then the ones that we're going to be doing fake trades for. So in the East, first off, we have the 76ers, and the guys there that I think the Mavericks could potentially swing a trade for, especially both of these guys are kind of under fire. Korkmaz specifically, who just requested a trade from Philly. Mavericks want to add a little more shooting depth. They could obviously go the Furkan Korkmaz route. They also got Matisse Thybulle, who the Mavericks were kind of linked to in the summer, but there really hasn't been any validity to any or smoke to any Matisse or Dallas connections as of recently. So, he's obviously there, but we did not make a fake trade for either of those guys just because there isn't really the reporting to back it up. With the Cleveland Cavaliers next up, we did make a fake trade for in this instance, and it's pretty self-explanatory. We'll be getting into it later once we actually get to the fake trades. But the guy we identified there was Karis LeVert. There's obviously been some smoke that the Mavericks have been linked to him. with the Miami Heat, we went with we're going to be doing a fake trade for that one as well. The Mavericks have been linked to Duncan Robinson for a few people. With the New York Knicks, the Mavericks have been linked to Cam Reddish and Emmanuel Quickly, so we will be doing those as well. With the Atlanta Hawks, the Mavericks there's been a little bit of smoke, but not necessarily enough to maybe constitute a whole, a whole fake trade that we kind of wanted to craft here. But we did identify a couple guys that we think the Mavericks may consider as they approach this trade deadline, or maybe on the horizon that we could maybe see them going for. These guys are kind of on the trade market, quote unquote, and one guy has been on the trade market for perpetually for like the last 3 years. And these guys are, of course, Bogdanovich and John Collins. For the Bulls, a couple of these guys Mavericks were linked to in the summer, of course, I'm sure you know, but there really hasn't been any sort of credence to the fact that the Mavericks could get them in the near future, or any rumors backing up that they've been linked to them for this ensuing trade deadline. But if the Mavericks are looking to add maybe a little depth to that backcourt, furbish it up a little bit, get that third ball handler, not really ready for Jaden Hardy to take that step, you could always go the Goran Dragic or Kobe White direction. Same with the Wizards with Monte Morris, and they also have the rim runner and weak side rim protector that is Daniel Gafford that I think would be interesting. With all these guys, of course, a lot of these guys don't warrant us making a whole fake trade just because there hasn't been enough smoke there. But we wanted to just mention them as guys that we have distinguished as potential fits for the Mavericks. Next up with the Raptors, there technically hasn't really been any smoke in terms of the Mavericks potentially swinging a trade for OG Anunoby, but he's the hot name on the block right now. And we wanted to at least craft a way to see if the Mavericks could add him to Kyrie and Luka. So we did make a fake trade for him, as well as Gary Trent Jr., just because we kind of grouped them in together. But there really hasn't been any credence to both of those rumors. We've identified 4 guys on the Orlando Magic that we could see the Mavericks making a trade for, but they are all kind of long shots, and sort of the perfect scenario would have to arise. All of those guys are going to be Jonathan Isaac, Markelle Fultz, Terrence Ross, and Mo Bamba. Isaac for defensive versatility. Fultz, would be the third ball handler. Terrence Ross kind of is the THJ supplement if he ends up going somewhere. And then Mo Bamba, obviously that rim protecting big that can stretch the floor, would work well with Christian Wood idealistically if they were ever paired together. So who knows if that's ever come to fruition, but we got those guys. Do have a conglomerate of guys as well on the Hornets. We have Gordon Hayward, Terry Rozier, PJ Washington. Hayward, he's definitely on the decline to an extent, especially with some of his play this season, and just how the Hornets have fared. But I still think he can be a contributory role player on a lot of teams and provide a little bit of creation if the Mavericks still feel like they need a pop off the bench. Terry Rozier would obviously be like your distinguished 6-man ball handler off the bench. I don't necessarily know if the Mavericks have that pressing of a need, but I think he would be a really good fit. And obviously PJ Washington, versatile defender, can kind of defend like 3 through 5, can act as a small ball 5, good rebounder. His offensive game is a work in progress, but it still has some good aspects to it. He's a good cutter. He's improving shooter. He's a really intriguing young guy. I'd love him on this team. I just don't know exactly what the pathway to getting him would be. And then lastly, with the Pistons, we do have some fake trades for them because there has been some smoke on this front in terms of the Mavericks' interest in Bojan Bogdanovic. And then we created some for Nerlens Noel and Alec Burks just due to the expendability of those guys and the fact that they could be, basically traded in aggregate with Bojan. And even though there technically hasn't really been a lot of smoke on the Nerlens or Alec Burks fronts in terms of their potential, in Nerlens' case, return to Dallas, and Alec Burks' case, coming to Dallas. So that is what we surmised for the East. There's a lot more teams in the East that we thought or sought as potential trade partners for the Mavericks. But nonetheless, we obviously didn't just, go pinpoint every team blindly. There were some teams that we kind of identified, ballparked the roster, and didn't really think that they had guys that the Mavericks could trade for, or for that matter, even if they did, just not guys that they'd be willing to give up, or just wouldn't maybe necessarily be the best fit with the Mavericks. So those were the teams that we identified. Jaren, if you want to go ahead and tell everybody who we have in the West, it's a much shorter list, but if you want to go ahead and hash out all those teams and the mock trades that we do for them before we get into the ensuing mock trades that we did.
Yeah, I think in the West, I mean, as you alluded to, it's a much shorter list than it was in the East. But to start out, we will start up north with Minnesota. Of course, I mean, I don't think there's really any connections being made, but Naz Reid, a good young potential piece. I mean, that you can stick, I think, in.
He's one of the more coveted guys that,
yeah,
we are looking to in this postpartum Kyrie epidemic. So that's why we sought his inclusion here.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well said. And then I went ahead and plugged Oklahoma City here. Not for any connection reasons. I just, I feel like if someone's going to make a playoff push, that's the team to sort of trade for the Christian Woods of the world to get that playoff push. And that's why I plugged them in here. Don't have any, trades cooked up for them. I just see that being a potential suitor. If anything were to change up and if they decided to go full force into the playoffs, I think that's a team that could possibly be in talks with the Mavericks. And then next, of course, we have Utah. We recently just played them last night, of course. And, we had Vanderbilt sitting out. What was it called? Due to like trade enclosures or something? I forget.
No. I think that was just a joke, but no,
okay, but it was.
Oh, really?
No, I don't think it was real.
But some guy on Twitter said trade deadline-itis.
Yeah, deadline-itis. Yeah, no, that's what it. I wouldn't be surprised if that was like, of course, not real, but that was the real case.
Yeah.
And so we got Vanderbilt, of course, Malik Beasley, Conley, Kelly Olynyk, and then Jordan Clarkson. And
just to preface, we only did make trades for Jared Vanderbilt and Kelly Olynyk because the other guys just hasn't been like enough Mavericks connected smoke for us to make fake trades, but we did want to make their inclusion here because, well, I guess with Beasley there was that rumor about the DFS package, but now DFS is gone. I don't know.
Yeah, he's gone.
But yeah, so you guys will see the trades as we turn them out. Continue, Jaren.
Yeah, and then next we got the Clippers of Los Angeles. We got, I think, 2 trades cooked up for those. Next we will go out to our best friends in Phoenix. And there's one little trade, I think it's Jay Crowder is like, of course, the hot name on the block. And that's sort of, what the Mavericks need is wing depth and especially defensive wings. That fits it. And so that's why we included that. We included Sacramento, not for, any big reason or anything, but there's just sort of small marginal guys on that roster that we feel as though they could be looking to ship for a bigger guy. And I think that's something that would shape this Mavericks roster if need be. And then, of course, we got San Antonio. I feel like we got a couple good cooked up packages for that that include Pirtle and Josh Richardson. And then I went ahead and just threw this in here. Don't have any trades cooked up or any connection towards this, but I just know his name is swirling around the block, and that's Bones Highland of Denver, of course.
Yes, we didn't make any trades for him, but I did post a fake trade for him on Twitter about a week ago. If you guys want to go look at it, I was under fire for it though. So I definitely think the Bones Highland, the need for him is definitely not as high as it once was. But after the Kyrie situation, as it is for any third ball handler, I think the Mavericks have some opportunities to look to the buyout market for that department. But they also have the opportunity if they could get one of these guys in a trade and still get that defensive wing depth. I mean, that's an option I would definitely hope that they could look at. Nonetheless, before we actually dive into the specific mock trades, Jaren, just kind of, I guess some people may be kind of bewildered as to why we're still doing a trade deadline primer after Kyrie was recently shipped. We talked about this ad nauseum and, both of our last podcasts pertaining to Kyrie, but just kind of mention to those who, may not necessarily understand why that we're still doing a trade deadline primer and why moves are probably on the horizon for the Mavericks, as a lot of reports are insinuating.
Yeah, I think the Mavericks, I mean, of course, at a surface level, I think they have another move, possibly even two to make. If all goes well, possibly even three.
Yeah,
But
there's a world in which the Mavericks make three
yeah,
moves at the trade deadline.
yeah, they could. Yeah, there is a world that does exist. But yeah, I think that there's definitely some moves to be made, whether it's regarding Tim Hardaway, Christian Wood, even Dwight Powell, Davis Bertans, guys like that. These are sort of guys that you have to look to trade now. We mentioned this, of course, in the Kyrie pod a minute ago, that the Mavericks pretty much have to push all their chips in. They have to go on for a championship because you don't know what's going to happen next year. And, unfortunately, I love Christian Wood and all, but unfortunately, it might have to not include the names of Christian Wood and Tim Hardaway Jr. And that's whenever you look to deal those guys. And that's sort of, I guess, the packages at which we centered around regarding the Mavericks and who they're sending it to was really centered around those three names, and Bertans, Christian Wood, and Tim Hardaway. Of course, I mean, those are the hot names in the block regarding the Mavericks. But yeah, I think, there's still moves to be made if you want a championship rounded roster. We have a huge hole at the wing position and, of course, in defense, just in overall.
And the rim protector position.
And yeah, I was about to get into rim protecting. And yeah, that's sort of where this hole lies. I think, as you said, and I mean, as you look more into it, the third ball handler position is more of a treat rather than a need now. And I think you can look elsewhere, or you can keep it in your peripheral vision, but you can definitely look elsewhere to target guys. And I think that's sort of what we had our eyes on when cooking up most of these packages.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that if things definitely don't go well as the season ends up, continues and ensues, and Mavericks don't get to where they want and they roll back around with Kyrie and Luka next year, then I think over the offseason and maybe at the draft is like when you try to address that third ball handler situation. But if they can do something to do it now, by all means, I'm not posting any rebuttals to that. Go, they can go for it. But the positions of need right now to elevate this team to championship contention most prominently right now are going to be, obviously depth at the wing in terms of defense, whether it's a 3-and-D wing or a slashing wing, and obviously a rim protector. So those are a lot of the trades that we're kind of pining for. There's a few third ball handler creation type guys in here, but in most instances that comes with the prerequisite that they're, the Mavericks are getting a defense elsewhere, even, in that same trade with those guys, or they've already made a trade. So, we made a lot of trades that kind of that aren't just, kind of one-off applicable at all times trades. A lot of these trades do have we're based off a previous fake trade, which is kind of funny because technically nothing has happened yet, but the Mavericks are a team, like Jaren had mentioned, that could make 2, maybe even 3 moves if things really come into full effect here as the trade deadline ensues over the next couple days. Because I mean, they have to push all their chips in, and all the draft picks are at play. Jaren had mentioned all those salary filler guys, and Hardaway Jr., Reggie Bullock, Dwight Powell, Davis Bertans. I mean, the list goes on, of course, but a lot of those guys by themselves, aren't the most highly coveted. So the remaining Mavericks 2027 first round pick, potentially their 2025 first round pick, that I'll say this just right now, at any trade that we list the 2025 first round pick in, it is with the prerequisite that the Mavericks were able to successfully renounce the rights on their 2023 first round pick that is owed to the New York Knicks. I do not know exactly how the process works there. I have to look up the details. I did reach out to CBA Mavs, but he has yet to get back to me regarding that. But I know that it is not just a instance where the Mavericks can decide that they would like to renounce the protections there. There has to be some sort of agreement with the Knicks there. I don't know if that involves the Mavericks having to trade with the Knicks for that happening to occur. But I do know there has to be some sort of formal agreement there. So just understand that if there's any picks where we're including the 2025 first round pick for the Mavericks. We are fully aware that the Stepien rule prevents the Mavericks of trading that pick as of right now. But we're doing it with the prerequisite that they have already traded, or they have already tended to the fact that they're no longer protecting that 2023 first round pick that they owe to the Knicks this year. But barring that, I mean, I don't really think I have much more else to say before we go ahead and dive into this one. Jaren, would you like to go ahead and lead the floor with our first fake trade?
Yeah, we'll kick it off. Right next door was San Antonio. This I think was honestly one of our better cooked up trades. But this would be sending Tim Hardaway to San Antonio and a 2027 first round pick. And just to sweeten it up, you can, or I don't even think you really need to include this, 2025 second round pick for, of course, Josh Richardson and Jakob Poeltl. I guess what that brings the Mavericks, of course, is a rim protecting sort of big who can also rebound the ball really well. And, you know, we get to be greeted with our good friend Josh Richardson back in Dallas, but, you know, more in line, that's wing depth, and that's a defensive guy that you can sort of rely on off the bench. And sort of what that trade is, you know, Tim Hardaway, he's a valuable piece, of course, right now. I hate saying that, but he is. That's sort of your rounding out your holes sort of pick. That's, of course, assuming that you keep Christian Wood. I think him and Jakob Poeltl would instantly work really extremely well off each other. And yeah, of course, Josh Richardson off the bench. I mean, he can pseudo ball hand a little bit, but more so relying on his shooting and defense in that scenario.
He has improved marginally as a shooter since he was on the Mavericks last. And, you know, giving, you know, especially on that Mavericks team, he was asked probably to play a little bit beyond his means. And I mean, really just asking him to focus a little more in on just honing in on defense and his 3-point shooting, I think would really do wonders. I mean, we've seen him probably pretty solid in his stops in San Antonio and Boston these last couple of years. It's, you know, he's not the Miami Josh Richardson anymore, but he can still definitely be a guy that gives a solid contribution. As Jaren had mentioned, this is one of those moves rather that it does fill a lot of the gaps, and it adds to the wing defense with the Richardson move. Poeltl, of course, is a very esteemed rim protector, huge dude, you know, helps the rebounding too. I mean, this would patch a lot of holes. So if the Mavericks were to do this one, this would definitely be an instance. This is kind of why we like this one so much, because it's really not sacrificing a ton besides that pick in 2027. And at the same time, you don't have to make maybe 2-3 trades to necessarily add like the proper depth to this roster. So this is why this was one of our favorites. Some of the other trades that we have involve a lot more moving parts and things of that nature. But in this instance, you know, you can argue the Mavericks still kind of do have that void at in terms of their wing depth there, because, you know, you maybe want one more guy, or, you know, Richardson is definitely probably more inclined to defend ones and twos than he is, you know, a guy that you're just wanting to go ahead and stick on some of these bigger point forwards in the NBA, like a Paul George or Kevin Durant, something like that. You know, you're not getting a guy with that sort of size, but it still does patch a lot of gaps, and it was one of the more all-encompassing trades. I guess I'll go ahead and lead the next one, and then you can go ahead and elaborate, Jaren, and we'll kind of just operate with that little trade-off structure. But the next one that we have cooked up here is going to be involving the Phoenix Suns. Jaren actually crafted this one, and it would be sending Christian Wood to the Phoenix Suns. So, you know, Chris Paul gets a nice dynamic lob threat that they need, that roll cut big, especially. And I do think that, Jaren, you were probably, you know, I don't know if the Suns would do this with Ayton still, or you were operating under the assumption that Ayton would be leaving. You want to maybe speak to what your thought process was there?
Like, really, honestly, I think that this could work with Ayton in the lineup. I know Ayton's more of a sort of roller, especially whenever Chris Paul's in the lineup, but Christian Wood can still create his own offense. I think we
still
forget
play on the
about that.
wing and, you know, shoot.
Yeah. I was like, I think we forget about that a little bit. I mean, of course they have Cam Johnson, who's like really their main wing defender, but I mean, this adds a little more versatility at the big position, and that's something that they really don't have, relying so heavily on Ayton. I think that's really what you do is you expand the big position in Phoenix. And of course, you get off that negative asset in Jay Crowder. I don't know if you announced who would be sending, but you get off the negative asset of Jay Crowder.
Yes, but the full trade as followed is going to be Christian Wood to the Phoenix Suns. And we do understand that, Christian Wood has technically only been linked to the Los Angeles Clippers amidst these rumors of, after contract extensions with him and the Mavericks are basically in progress. Well, not in progress from the standpoint that they're working on a contract, but we don't necessarily know what's going on. I wouldn't say they're at a stalemate either, though. We just really have no clue what's going on beyond closed doors, besides the fact that a contract extension was indeed offered. So Christian Wood to the Phoenix Suns, and then to the Mavericks, they would get Bismack Biyombo, Jay Crowder, and a 2025 second-round pick back. So the Mavericks then have the versatility to be able to deploy 2 seconds in another trade, which they currently do not have because they only have 1 second-round pick after the Kyrie Irving trade left on the market. I do think that this one would have a lot of different benefits. You get a championship vetted guy, I'm pretty sure Jay Crowder at one point or another has played with Kyrie, either in his time in Cleveland or Boston. They may have just had the perfect storm in terms of like the years that they, was he in that deal for Kyrie?
I feel like he played in Boston one year. I think they went to the Eastern Conference Finals.
They may have, but nonetheless, guys that have kind of been familiarized within that scene, even if I apologize for that's malpractice on my part by not knowing that. But nonetheless, and then you get, Biyombo, he doesn't solve the rim protection problem, but he's a capable guy that comes off the bench and, can, furbish that front a little more. And, maybe the Mavericks in this instance, they use that second to go and add some more wing depth or another rim protector. So you get 2 defensive guys. I think in this instance, this probably would be one of those scenarios where the Mavericks at least got one more move in them after this. But it definitely, it provides some help in the short term. Now, a lot of fans at face value would probably say that this is we're not getting anything back for Christian Wood. Like he deserves much more. And the real thing at play here is that second round pick. I mean, maybe we would even want Phoenix to pay 2 second-round picks back in this trade. But potentially even a first. I don't know if Christian Wood commands that value at this juncture. If his value hasn't changed since when the Mavericks got him, then I guess probably they would. I could see them giving him a first, but and there's another Christian Wood trade that's kind of eerily similar to the Clippers, but it's basically you get back a second or 2, maybe even a first, to be able to have the versatility to then go swing another trade. We understand that Bismack Biyombo and Jay Crowder don't necessarily equate value-wise to Christian Wood, but the Mavericks do have options that they could deploy afterwards to really build a competitive roster, adding those guys to the depth. So that's kind of the line of thinking here. But nonetheless, lasting thoughts about the trade. Even if like Ayton left, like this could be something I could see the Suns doing if they don't get a big man in return for Ayton and they just need something last minute. So I do think that this was a really interesting one that you included. And I think the Suns are a very underrated team to maybe be in the market for a guy like Wood, just because of the volatility of what could happen with DeAndre Ayton. So I do like that one a lot from you. Do you want to go ahead and carry the next one?
Yeah. I know you cooked this one up. I actually really like this one. It was to the Utah Jazz. The Mavericks would be getting our boy that we've been going after, or that we've been wanting, we've been pining for. It'd be to the Mavericks, Jared Vanderbilt, and Simone, I don't know, how do you say it? Bonacheo. And then, of course, Utah would be getting Reggie Bullock and a 2027 first overall pick. I gotta give a special shout out because in this and also this one comes with the prerequisite that if the Mavericks were to have got a pick back from one of those other teams, that Utah's asking price for Vanderbilt is said to be 2 seconds. So maybe the Mavericks could pull this off with just 2 seconds, which would be idealistic. They keep that first in their back pocket. But so that was like what we kind of wanted to get at, but obviously we can't do that in the trade machine. When the Mavericks don't have the seconds at the moment. So
But special shout out to a user on Twitter, Wistrin is kind of how he pronounces his name, but he actually crafted this fake trade, and I stole it from him. But I believe since I completely botched the pronunciation of that, I believe his username on Twitter is WHRISTIAN. So he crafted this fake trade specifically, and the salaries kind of just barely worked. Mavericks actually save a little bit of money. So they get Vanderbilt, and this, if you're doing the rendition of this where it's just the first round pick, then in all likelihood the Mavericks probably, this would probably be the last move that they make. But if you're doing the seconds version, they can always do something else. So I do really like this trade. Jaren, talk about Jared Vanderbilt, because him and Naz Reid are two guys that, as the Mavericks approach this trade deadline, I think that we're like really honing in on, and guys that are younger but could also vastly improve over the course of the next few years and change the defensive trajectory of this team. So just kind of talk about the defensive versatility this guy could add to the forefront of this roster, and even if he doesn't have a shot, like how just vetted and ready he is, especially if he develops that jump shot in the future, and how he can still help now.
Yeah, he's only a second-year pro, I believe, right?
No, I think he's third or fourth year. Let me check.
Okay, he might be. Yeah, he might be a third year. Anyways, just the size factor alone. He's a very scary defender, I guess, to look at. He's good length, and just good versatility.
He's like a strong, like 6'9", 220.
Yeah, like he's got good intangibles whenever it comes to the defensive end. Like I said, he's a bigger guy. He can kind of guard really like 3 to 5, I would say.
But he has the ability to step on ones and twos.
He can help. He can be a really good help side defender on those ones and twos. Need be like with a pick and roll or whatever it may be. And yeah, he just has the ability to really stretch the floor defensively, like space the offense out for that matter. And he's really honestly a factor that you have to worry about when competing against. And him in tangent with Maxi Kleber, heck, even Josh Green, like that would be ideal as a backlining if you're looking at it from a like 2-3 standpoint. I think this would be the most ideal is if we compare him with Reed. Naz Reid, of course, being the 5, and then Jared Vanderbilt handling down the 5 or 4. I think that'd be the most ideal. But of course, I think if the Mavericks make this move, this is, like you said, this is the last move. And yeah, Jared Vanderbilt.
Well, in this rendition of the trade,
in this
first round pick, yeah.
And yeah, like I said, I think Vanderbilt elevates your defense to another level automatically just by being on the court.
No, 100%. And surprisingly enough, Jaren, this is actually his 6th season in the NBA.
Oh, 6th? Oh, wow.
And you want to know how old he is? Or no, it's not his 6th. I misread that.
I was about to say,
okay, no, okay, because he got traded. Oh, because he got traded to Denver. So that I was reading it wrong on the Wikipedia, because he got traded in the 2019-20 season midway through the year from Denver to Minnesota. But this is indeed his 5th season in the league. It's his 5th season, and he's only 23.
Okay. Damn.
So he came in really
yeah.
18. I
could have swore this was like his second, third year.
No, this is his 5th season in the league. His first year was the 2018-19 season. And he only played sparingly throughout his first 3 seasons, but really started to catch wind with the Timberwolves. And, him and Jaden McDaniels are just kind of eerily similar players. McDaniels maybe a little more brought up to speed offensively, but that's kind of why they went different directions with him. And that's why he was shipped in that Gobert trade after last year. So, no, but this has been a guy the Jazz have been trying to, or, been looking to potentially move off of since that Gobert trade. So, this would be a very idealistic fit. I love this one, Jaren. Jaren, just so we can kind of, transition easily, go ahead and just do the other Jared Vanderbilt trade that we have cooked up, because we actually have 2 of them.
Yeah, so I think this one from a value perspective is probably more what I guess fans would be looking for. You'd be getting a lot in return. And that would be sending Tim Hardaway Jr. and a 2025 first. So that would, what we talked about with the stepping rule and, with the 2023 regards with New York, that would all have to apply, of course. But we would be sending Tim Hardaway Jr. and the 2025 first to Utah for Kelly Olynyk.
I think I actually messed this one up, though. You could send the 2027 one.
You could. I just don't think that'd be as enticing. But yeah, of course. I believe Utah has been looking to get off of Kelly Olynyk, or at least actively shopping him. And same with Vanderbilt. And I think that this is, one where you paired Tim Hardaway Jr. I mean, it doesn't really benefit
in the tank, because both Olynyk and Olynyk may necessarily not be worth the first, but he's probably worth like 2 seconds. So if you have to deploy your most enticing first, you have to
go ahead. You go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
And you're getting a young Jared Vanderbilt, of course. We just talked about him. And then Kelly Olynyk, he's a stretch big. Is that how you would define him?
Yeah. That's what he is. He's a capable defender. He's not terrible at defending out in space. Obviously he has his bouts as a rim protector, but he gets swept under the rug kind of unfairly as just a bad defender, which is not the case. He's capable for sure. He's average, at least maybe slightly above average on a given night. So this maybe doesn't necessarily, and this would be hard to make any trades after this one too, but you add two very capable guys, and you add a lot to the rotation in this one, and the shooting. You also, with Vanderbilt's lack of shooting, you kind of get supplemented by Kelly Olynyk's like elite 3-point shooting. So this would be a really I think this would be a fun one, especially because, the Mavericks never have been linked specifically to Olynyk this year, but obviously there was the whole miscalculation with the Goran Dragic trade a couple years ago where we thought he was coming this way. So, they drafted him and then traded him instantly. So, to the Celtics. So, there's a little bit of a history there. They've always kind of been trouting around with Olynyk. So, I think it's one of those ones that I don't like it as much as the Spurs one for sure. In terms of just being one trade that could elevate us into championship contention, but it's up there. It's definitely a good one. And to speak to the last Vanderbilt trade, I kind of misworded what I was saying when I was making that. I actually had that. I had that as basically the follow up to the Christian Wood trade to the Clippers that we have not done yet. Or you could, the Christian Wood Suns trade. But basically what I was trying to get at with that is the Mavericks would be using 2 seconds in that instance from one of those previous Christian Wood trades where they got back seconds to be able to make that trade work. So, the previous Vanderbilt rendition wouldn't be without a previous trade. It would be the last stop, like we had mentioned, but it wouldn't be, it would be the second or third trade and, some previous courses of action for the Mavericks. Next up, let's go ahead and get to the whole New York Knicks saga, because we just love the New York Knicks and Jalen Brunson and all our friends over there. We have quite the limited history with them. They're only, they're kind of like the next door neighbor that, you like to say hi to every morning, but then you basically go inside and wish you spilled your coffee on. So, nonetheless, let's go ahead and get into it. So in this rendition, we have Reggie Bullock and a 2025 second round pick going to New York. And then to the Mavericks side of things, we have Cam Reddish and Emmanuel Quickly coming over. Jaren, you made this trade, and I kind of want to seek your opinion on this rather than mine. I'll take the next couple, but what was your line of thinking around this one and what this could provide to the Mavericks? And do you think the Knicks would accept it?
So I think overall, I think there might be a little more that needs to go to the New York side to accept it, just at face value. But of course, Cam Reddish and Reggie Bullock have been connected for probably about a month now. New York has been pining for Reggie Bullock to be on their team, and that has sort of been their one-up swap, has been Cam Reddish for Reggie. That's why I think, just including a second-round pick to kind of entice Quickly to be included in that would be like ideal. And that's really why I think Emmanuel Quickly could be included, is just if you include that second round pick. But regardless, I think, again, New York would need a little bit more just to have I guess, more of a value perspective because they're still trying to win as well. But with Cam Reddish and Reggie Bullock, you get your guy in Reggie, and then you send over quickly for that second round pick, which I think more so he might be worth a first, depending on how you look at him. But that's sort of the, I guess, backdrop behind that trade.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, this one has different ramifications that you can kind of get into when you're looking at Quickly's role as the third ball handler on the Mavericks team, because this was really, I think, one of only two trades where the Mavericks actually get a third ball handler. They can like really step into that role, quickly. He also has a chance to develop a little bit too, but he's definitely a guy that's kind of like, he's a 6-man type, even as, that's probably where the trajectory of his career kind of projects as well. So, I mean, I do like this one. And obviously, you mentioned that you think it might take a little more to entice the Knicks, but I may push back on that just from the perspective that Cam Reddish is like huge negative value right now. And I mean, if the Knicks are getting a pick, even if they do have to attach quickly, they're getting a pick. So, I mean, you may have to attach one more second, but you just hope kind of Cam Reddish diverts back to what he was in Atlanta, this intriguing sort of wing who can hit the three and occasionally, when the opportunity presents itself, even play make at times. So you would hope that he can kind of get back to that as he develops. And, obviously the Knicks have kind of been pining for Reggie, and maybe you can even make some sort of consolidation to renounce the protections on that 2023 pick to be able to trade your 2025 first. I don't know exactly how that works, like I said at the top of the pod, but for a variety of reasons, I think the Knicks would be a pretty optimal trade partner. But, it kind of depends on if you're willing to potentially take a hit with Cam Reddish not getting back to what he was in Atlanta. Because if that's the case, then, you probably are losing this trade at the end of the day, because at least Reggie shoots good throughout the year. Cam Reddish Reggie shoots good, once the turn of the new year hits. I mean, Cam Reddish just at this point isn't shooting or really doing anything on the court for that matter effectively since the season started. So, that it's an interesting trade, but it does have its drawbacks. Jaren, you want to go ahead and mention the next trade that we're going to be getting into?
Yeah, so we'll do, I guess, this next New York one. We'll get our friends in New York out of the way. So this one would be a 2-for-2 swap. This would be sending Reggie Bullock and Frank Ntilikina to the New York Knicks. Frank would be going back home, and
Reggie would too.
Yeah, and so this, exactly. And then again, Cam Reddish, and this time we would be Cam Reddish would be coming to Dallas, and then this time would be Isaiah Hartenstein coming to Dallas as well. I guess kind of what this does is this, gives Dallas that sort of rim protecting big who can sort of have a little bit of an offense to stretch the floor.
Not necessarily a shooter, but he has a little bit of a post up game.
Yeah, he's like, he doesn't spread the floor, but yeah, he has a post game. And yeah, I mean, he's a rim protector, and that's sort of what this does for Dallas, is opens up that possibility. And also you get Cam Reddish, who you just talked about ad nauseum, just has potential to become that sort of Atlanta mode again. So if that trade were to happen again, I mean, you'd lose Frank Ntilikina, that's defense, and that's about it. And then with Reggie Bullock, you lose the surefire offense and the surefire 60% shooting from January 1st on up. And you get in return Cam Reddish and Isaiah Hartenstein. So that's sort of the backbeat or the knowledge between that trade right there.
I mean, you are losing Reggie's defense to an extent, but we only see Reggie's defense in spurts. And admittedly, he's just not been as consistent this year. And that's why I think he's just a little more expendable for me this year versus last year. Like last year, I don't think that I think I'd be commanding a little more. I don't know if I'd be sending any sort of draft consolidation to the Knicks in this instance if we're talking about last year's Reggie. So that's an interesting one. But next, we're going to go ahead and hash these next two out just because they're really simple and there's just no other moving parts to them. No picks going anywhere, and they're sort of just 1-for-1 trades, but we wanted to include them in here because they have been heavily rumored. But first one is going to be Davis Bertans for Duncan Robinson straight up. Jaren, obviously you're swapping two shooters that have fell off the cliff exponentially because of some egregiously overpaid contracts and their percentages falling off a little bit. If Miami were to agree to this for whatever reason, you're just basically hoping one of these guys ends up shooting better at the second half of the season. They're on basically the same deal. I think Duncan Robinson's making about $950,000 more than Davis Bertans is. What would the Mavericks' reasoning to do this one be?
Yeah, I mean, we saw what Duncan Robinson was able to do when Miami made that like 2020 finals run that they like somehow made. I think that's sort of what you're like sort of captivating is just half of what Duncan Robinson did back then. I don't even believe that he has a role in this Miami team. So I guess just giving him a role and just letting him, do his thing, which is essentially just shooting. He's also not as much of a saloon door on defense as Davis Bertans is. We've become very accustomed to seeing Davis Bertans. Basically, the whole floor becomes a 5-on-4 at that point. And I think Duncan Robinson becomes a little more comparable on the defensive side of things. And of course, I mean, that's his one state is shooting, and that's why he got $17 million a year with Miami. So I think that's sort of just the one-up swap is purely negative for negative asset. But you're just hoping, like what you said, is you can just retain something in positive value out of that swap. So
yeah, no, 100%. And if the Mavericks were to do this one, this would not be likely the only move that we would hope that they'd make.
Yeah.
If it was, then that's pretty pitiful. So, I mean, then this really wouldn't even be doing much. Just maybe it's just kind of to add some more shooting around Luka and Kyrie and furbish the back half of the roster. Next one's kind of interesting because you're kind of, I think that this one's maybe a little more applicable. I could actually see that these two moves being used to work together, especially since you might be losing some shooting in this guy. You could use this that Duncan Robinson move with this one. But, obviously the Mavericks have a lot of scoring now. They have a lot of offensive prowess and firepower. Tim Hardaway Jr., his inclusion to the equation just doesn't fit as much. And, consolidating him for defense and having to expel picks is one thing. But, if you really want to go get the third ball handler and, go that route and, if you feel like you can find defense elsewhere with some of the other movable contracts and picks, this one's been kind of rumored for Cleveland just because they kind of got a logjam at guard up there with Garland, LeVert, Rubio, and Donovan Mitchell. And they maybe just want a little more shooting and pop in their lineup, a guy who doesn't necessarily have to play make and can kind of just stand in the corner and shoot. I mean, yes, Tim Hardaway Jr. He'll drive to the rim and, shoot the occasional pull-up mid-range jump shot, but he can play within a role a little bit more without needing the ball in his hands, even though sometimes he kind of goes against that agenda when we would hope that he doesn't. But obviously this one's been heavily rumored for months. And that's the Caris LeVert for Tim Hardaway Jr. swap. What are the Mavericks getting in Caris LeVert, Jaren?
Yeah, they're getting, really the third ball handler sort of role. Having Caris LeVert off the bench, I think would be huge. I think he is coming off the bench in Cleveland. But that's just more of a suiting role for him coming off the bench. He brings a level of defense that really not any of the guards in Dallas can bring. And I mean, that's saying a lot. He's not the most.
Yeah, he's definitely not the most stout defender, but he's better than the other ones.
Yeah, he's better than both the other two, probably.
Well, I might push back and say I think
Kyrie's actually, we'll see.
I would say Kyrie's better, but definitely an upgrade over Dinwiddie and not Luka when he's trying, but Luka when he's not trying for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Caris LeVert, he's a guy we saw earlier in the season go off for 40 points and then the very next game go off for 0. I think that's something we've become very accustomed to for who we're going to swap for him if that trade were to be of value. But that's sort of the thought process, is getting that third ball handler who can bring a little bit of defense and hopefully some scoring off the bench. And like I said, that third ball handling
just the manner in which he would be helping out. Like he's going to be playmaking more than Tim, and he can actually facilitate a entry pass and a lob pass. So, and run a pick and roll and things of that nature. And I mean that at that point, if you add Caris LeVert to this Mavericks rotation, the Mavericks have, I mean, do they really have any sort of bouts in terms of their shot creation at that point? I mean, I think they're pretty much chilling. Even in games that if Caris LeVert has to miss, you can throw Hardy a bone. And the reason that you'd be doing this because you don't think Hardy's, capable to step up. Obviously, even though he had an insanely good game last night, we still probably in agreement that he is not necessarily ready to, step into that 6-man role quite yet. But, this would help kind of bring him up to speed a little more slowly. But you also are sacrificing some minutes there with him. So keep that in mind. Jaren, what is the next trade that we have on our horizon?
Shall we entice, you pick which two? Shall we entice in the Minnesota one or shall we entice in the Clippers one? So
let's go ahead and do the Clippers one.
All right, so we got two for this. Actually, I want you to do the first one because you did cook up this one.
Yes, okay. So the first Clippers trade is going to be Robert Covington and Amir Coffey in 2 seconds for Christian Wood. And did I include somebody else in there?
Theo Pinson.
Theo Pinson, but I think the salaries work to where you don't necessarily have to do that. And the Mavericks, if it's so long, I will preface, because February 9th, Chris Silva's 10-day expires. So if the Mavericks wish to do any sort of 2-for-1 trade, they can withhold making the trade official till February 9th when Chris Silva's 10-day expires, and then they'll then at that point have another open roster spot to take back another guy. So if they don't end up doing any sort of 2-for-1 trades and they kind of just do these equal swaps from here on out, then that obviously will not be a withstanding issue. But if they do wish to do that, they have the flexibility to do that. So the way that they matched up his 10-day and everything works out pretty well. With that being said, I do think that this trade for the Mavericks obviously is, it adds a little bit of wing depth. You get a veteran in Rocco. He's not what he once was. You take a flyer on Amir Coffey, he's had his ups and downs as a wing. I mean, admittedly, I'm not the biggest Amir Coffey connoisseur, but he obviously, he kind of projects as this sort of 3-and-D wing. He's a quicker guy. He's got good size and he runs in transition well. He does have the ability to attack off a closeout occasionally. He did do a little bit of damage to the Mavericks. I think 2 years ago in that Clippers playoff series, not the bubble one, but the year after in 2021. So but he's kind of been a misfit amidst the logjam at wing for the Clippers. So, you're adding 2 wings, not necessarily, guys that are going to start, but they're good consolidatory pieces to bring off the bench, and they would help the rotation a lot. But the mainstay and the reason you'd be doing this is because you get those 2 seconds back, and getting those 2 seconds back, as I kind of alluded to earlier, that then helps you harness the ability to maybe swing for a Naz Reid or a Jared Vanderbilt, now that the Mavericks would actually have a little bit of draft capital, not just 1 second in their arsenal. And maybe also expels the possibility of you having to empty the tank and use a first round pick. If you want to hold on to those for the draft and things of that nature, obviously it's more preferable to do that. So if you can trade seconds by getting them back, you'd probably rather do that than trade first. And I mean, you can still, in a scenario like this, the Mavericks are still be making another trade or two. So I do like the flexibility it provides. And I mean, regarding Christian Wood, I would, like I kind of mentioned, like this is if the Mavericks just aren't able to come to terms on a contract, and the market for him is just a little bit dry out there. If the Mavericks can get back a first for him, I'd much rather them do that if they can. But as of right now, the Clippers are the only team to technically explore interest in him.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of have to see how this pans out. But at face value, this obviously has its drawbacks from the Mavericks kind of losing in terms of the dollar value, but it does it could add some flexibility if they want to make a move right after this, or kind of make it into a 3-teamer or something.
Yeah, of course. I think that's more of the sort of value play in which you're getting some value back. That's not necessarily on the court, but you can use to trade for other assets. So the second one with the Clippers is more of a on-court sort of swap where both these players are going to produce to their respective teams on the court. And this would be Marcus Morris for Christian Wood straight up. And salaries match, I think it's only like $500,000 off. But yeah, like I said, salaries match. And this one would just be more of an on-court thing. Between the Mavericks, they get a defensive wing, or not even defensive, but they get a wing who can score in numerous different ways. Of course, you're pairing up the Morris twins. We'll see you know,
I mean,
regarding
nobody in the
Luka,
league's gonna want to mess with you at this point.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And regarding Luka, it might be a little awkward. So we'll see if that ever did come into fruition, how that would pan out. But yeah, pretty much just straight up swap for Marcus Morris and Christian Wood. Yes, you lose, of course, that depth, or not even depth, but at least, yes, you lose that center sort of figure, but you get in return a bigger wing who, yeah, I mean, as we mentioned with Markieff Morris, like he's an intimidating guy. He's not a guy you want to mess with. And
I mean, Marcus is basically the exact same player as him. He's just a better scorer, maybe
better
slightly
scorer and
less stout defensively.
yeah, like that's the only difference.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of the value in terms of now trade that the Mavericks could make with the Clippers. But I do like yours because you can use those seconds to
Yeah.
sort of send off a trade.
Yeah, no, but I mean, yours isn't too bad either because in this rendition, the Mavericks don't give up any picks. So I mean, this would still definitely be like one of those that we talked about that they're going to make another move. And I think at this point, you have this sort of weird conglomerate of wings, even if some of them aren't necessarily the best defenders, but you're supplementing that with so much scorings that it kind of may be redundant. So I think at this point, maybe the Mavericks try to swing for a rim protector and go for Naz Reid after this.
Yeah,
A guy like that, which is a good tie-in. So,
yeah.
Jaren, go ahead and tell everybody about the package for Naz Reid.
Yeah, so this would be sending Reggie Bullock to the Minnesota Timberwolves for Taurean Prince and Naz Reid. I believe there was a first included in this. Am I not wrong? I think it was it the 2027?
Oh, yes, the 2027 first.
Yeah, so this would be Reggie Bullock and the 2027 first sent off to Minnesota for Naz Reid and Taurean Prince. And that's more so a salary filler with Taurean Prince. But even still, Taurean Prince is, I think, a pretty comparable NBA player, a guy that you're not losing too much value in. And then, of course,
he's a good 3-and-D player. I mean, you're getting good wing depth there.
Yeah, he is. But your main stake in that trade, of course, is getting Naz Reid. And automatically that boosts your team into, I think, another level. I'm really high on Naz Reid, as y'all can tell. But that I think it's pretty good value. I mean, Reggie Bullock, he's a shooter. That team needs some sort of change regarding a win now player, and Reggie Bullock's a win now player. And then, of course, they also get a first round pick in return for Naz Reid. And I think that's just sort of the, I guess, change in that, or not change. That's just sort of, I guess, the thought process behind that. You get a win now player for a win now player, and then including a first round pick. Because Taurean Prince, I don't believe he's really in their system that much. I don't believe he's
averaging like 8 a game, but he's definitely the last guy in the in the wing conglomerate that is like Kyle Anderson and Jaden McDaniels. He's definitely like the last option there. So and I mean, from the Timberwolves perspective, they do this because you ask, why are they even offering up a guy like Naz Reid? Well, it's because, I mean, first of all, they have Cat and Rudy Gobert as this thing that they're basically committed to. They've stranglehold themselves with that. It's not like they have a ton of optionality to move on with that. And it's not like they're doing it at the deadline. If they move on from that, it's going to be like maybe 1 or 2 seasons from now at the earliest. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, talks in terms of contract extensions with Naz Reid are at a stalemate. And it definitely seems like they might lose him for nothing. So that's kind of why he's on the trade block at the moment. Jaren, you obviously have kind of liked this guy since he's been all the way back at LSU. He's obviously really took a step this year. He's kind of was just especially defensively this year, he's took a step.
Yeah.
But just kind of for those who don't know, what is his game like, and what type of player would the Mavericks be getting here?
Yeah, so coming in the league, he was more of an offensive talented guy. He's a stretch 5 in the sense that he can shoot the 3. He's not going to wow you in any of the moves that he does or anything, but he can.
But he's like sneaky athletic.
Like I was about to say, he can get to the hole just based off athleticism and first step alone.
Yeah, he can beat guys off the dribble as a big, which is really interesting.
And it's interesting, especially for his size. And defensively, he's really elevated his defensive game, especially this season. He's not becoming a shot blocker, but he's becoming a comparable defender who can step up on the pick and rolls, who you can rely upon to like sort of deflect the passing lanes. He's a longer guy with a longer wingspan, and that's sort of what you rely on. And he's become like I said, not an elite shot blocker by any means, but he's a guy that you can feel comfortable sticking one-on-one with a guard in case of a switch or anything like that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, he still has room to grow too. Like this,
Exactly.
the best way I would kind of describe him is like a more athletic Maxey probably right now. Maybe not as good as a weak side shot blocker, but he's not just that. That's not something that is just completely out of his arsenal. I mean, it's definitely not as good as his ability to defend in space, but he still has the ability to, help, defend on that side. It's just a matter of the fact that he is 6'9", so he doesn't necessarily have the standing reach to be able to get up there sometimes. But I mean, you're looking at a guy that really can hone in on both sides of the ball, and especially, you could pair him with Christian Wood at the Mavericks wish to keep him, or you could, obviously shoot. If Christian Wood's gone out the door, then you can use Naz Reid as a vessel of your future front court. So this is I really like this one. And we obviously talked a lot about just, maybe potentially making two moves. One of the more idealistic scenarios, in my opinion, would be if the Mavericks could somehow, there are, if they play their cards right, it's not necessarily easy, but they could find a way to get Jared Vanderbilt and Naz Reid. I think that immediately places them above, like, that immediately puts them in contention pretty easily. Like, and just in terms of the talent on that roster, it'd be top 3 in the NBA. I mean, even getting one of those guys definitely elevates them a significant margin. Do we even have any more fake trades?
I mean, we have a handful more. I guess like the more enticing ones, if we want to leave the Raptors ones, I'm okay with that. If we want to leave those ones out.
No, I do. I don't want to. We don't need to go too heavily in depth into them, but I would like.
Okay, because I was like, I do want to get not in depth, but I do want to speak on the Detroit ones. But if we just want to run over these Toronto ones real quick, we'll start with the smaller one of the two. This would basically be the same player swap. This would be Tim Hardaway Jr. and a first-round pick sent to the Raptors for Gary Trent Jr. Essentially, I don't even know if you'd have to send a first-round pick. You could probably get away with a second, maybe two. But essentially, Tim Hardaway Jr. would be the negative asset in that. Meanwhile, Gary Trent would be the very positive asset. But Toronto's in a weird sort of state where they don't know what they don't know what they want to do with the roster. And Gary Trent Jr. is a guy who has been linked to a lot of trades. And I mean, the Mavericks not need for shooting, but he's definitely a guy that could space the floor a little more and be more consistent than Tim Hardaway, especially.
Yeah, he may not be. I don't think Gary Trent Jr. necessarily has the pop that Tim does in terms of, like, he's probably not going to have as many of those like 32-point games or whatever.
Yeah.
Where Tim just can't miss, but he's going to give you more consistent 16 points.
Consistency, yeah.
And on top of that, he's younger than Tim. He's not about to hit the 30 wall. I think he's only like 24. And he's definitely, he's not some sort of elite defender, but he's definitely more competent than Tim on that end. I mean, he at least can defend in space a little bit and doesn't lose his man basically the second that they try to run any sort of switch scram action. So yeah, I mean, that's the reason you make that trade. You just basically get a boosted Tim that's younger.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Moving on to the second one with Toronto, this would be the dream come true trade. This would be the instant bump into the finals contention.
Yeah.
Trade. This would be sending.
This is a very, like, we think that this is a very slim margin that this would happen.
Yeah, I don't even think
we wanted to put it on here though.
Yeah, this wouldn't happen, but sending to Toronto would be JaVale McGee, Tim Hardaway Jr., Jaden Hardy, a 27 and 25 first round pick, and then of course coming back is the big boy OG Anunoby, Kim Birch, and DJ Wilson. Those are sort of just salary fillers at that point. But yeah, I mean, pretty self-explanatory. OG Anunoby, defensive 3-and-D wing, probably the best in the game at this point. And
well, I mean, I'm not the best in the game. If we're
he can become the best in the game.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say if you label Kawhi Leonard as a 3-and-D wing, but in terms of defensive wings that can play make, and he started as a 3-and-D wing, and now he's really opened up the arsenal of his game. He's still really young. I mean, this guy could be a future all-star.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's a big package. There's a lot of moving figures in that. And that's sort of the thought process behind that is just, I mean, you're going to have to give a big figure for him. And that was sort of our big package that we had to cook up.
Yeah. The Mavericks better win the championship at this point because
Yeah, at that point,
they have nothing left to. I mean, at least with some of these other packages, even if the Mavericks do expel their picks, these are still like fairly valuable guys that you can move if need be in the offseason and get stuff in return. In this instance, it would be really hard to deconstruct this team if once you commit to that.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's very true.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on with these two, this is more of like the probably more realistic options of the two. And these are actually our final two. So this would be with the Detroit Pistons. I guess we'll start out with the lesser of the two. So Detroit would be getting in return Davis Bertans and 2 second-round draft picks for Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel. And again, that's sort of the scoring wing that the Mavericks get in Alec Burks. He's a guy who's uber offensively talented. And then, of course, Nerlens Noel, a shot blocker, which we've been talking about ad nauseum for 3 years now.
Ever since he was on our team and he was
ever since he was on our team, and that was 5 years ago, and we're still talking about it. Hopefully he's not eating hot dogs on the sideline at this point, but that's sort of that I think that's more an ideal trade. Alec Burks, again, I mean, he's a honestly, I didn't even realize how good he was offensively. I honestly forgot, but he's averaging 13.5 points this year.
Yeah, especially if so was this the version in which they traded Tim?
No, so this is the Tim one would be next.
Yeah, so they could also, this would make a lot more sense if the Mavericks traded Tim in another trade as well. Kind of replacing that scoring output with Alec Burks. And as far as Nerlens goes, he has not played a lot at all. They've been throwing him behind Jalen Duran and things of that nature. But Jaren, why do you think, for those that may not understand why Nerlens really isn't playing with that Detroit squad, why could he still be a valuable rim protector for the Mavericks?
Yeah, I mean, again, he's not a guy that fits the mold of the Pistons, I guess, fits the timeline, and that's sort of why he's sitting on the bench. But a rim protector has been key need for like 5 years now, like we said. Nerlens Noel brings a perfect level of off the bench sort of rim protecting that you need. I don't know if I mean, theoretically he could start, but
you can pair him with Christian Wood if you need to.
And like he's very versatile, especially with who we could pair him with.
Yeah. Now, I mean, he has a tendency to get beasted on the boards. He's definitely slimmer still, and he does not have the ability to stretch the floor. But he's pretty excellent. He in the short roll, he has like solid touch. We saw that even in his time here. He obviously never materialized into the guy that we all thought and dreamed he could have been, but he can still be a solid, valuable rim protector as a veteran that can definitely mentor some of the. I was going to say he could mentor some of the Mavericks bigs.
Yeah, I was about to say. I was like, well,
I was like, maybe he can mentor Chris Silva if he stays around. It's getting late, guys. I apologize. It's me and Jaren are emptying the tank just as the Mavericks need to at the trade deadline for you guys right now.
Yeah, of course. All right, so I guess we'll round out this last one. So this one probably more of what everyone else wants to hear. So this would be a 2027 first. Tim Hardaway Jr. and Dwight Powell headed to Detroit for Bogdanovich and Noel. And again, I mean, Bogdanovich, pretty self-explanatory. You get a sort of creative, not wing, but a guy who can hold his own defensively and, on offense can create his own shot. That would essentially be 4 playmakers at that point on the floor that you could put on the floor at one point. And then again, you get Nerlens Noel, shot blocker, who you would bring off the bench at that point. But yeah, you're sending out Tim Hardaway and you're sending out Dwight Powell. So that opens up a little more room for Nerlens Noel to have a bigger role.
No, maybe he might start. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, at that point he might start, depending on Maxi's health. But yeah, I mean, you're sending out Tim Hardaway, Dwight Powell, and then of course that 2027 first, which would be sort of more enticing for the Pistons. I think this is sort of a trade that we would sort of cook up December-ish, and possibly could work. I think Bogdanovich has sort of elevated his I guess, value a lot more, but it
But at the
depends.
same time, I don't think Nerlens is carrying a lot of value right
No,
now.
and yeah, that's the same point. Is no one's not like he really isn't. And you have an expiring contract in Powell, and then of course a declining contract in Tim Hardaway. So I think that's sort of like the thought process behind there. If
Yeah.
you're Detroit, and I mean, of course, you get that 2027 first, and I think any first at this rate is valuable, especially for a team that I think could be very talented next year, especially granted that they might get Wembanyama. So I think any first that team can get is possibly in trade route for next season if they're trying to make a playoff push.
Yeah, because they can always trade future first for if they want to get to that number one pick. But
yeah, exactly.
I mean, nonetheless, yeah, like, we didn't even really talk about it as much in this podcast, but just the structure of contracts and expirings and declining contracts and how many years are left. Like, these are all integral parts, of course, and in a lot of these trades that we kind of looked at beforehand for sure, but we didn't really have the time to explain on the podcast. So definitely take that into account as well, as Jaren had alluded to. And I mean, just with a lot of these trades, like, if the Mavericks do one, or even in most instances, maybe besides that Duncan Robinson trade, if the Mavericks do like multiple of these, I mean, you're looking at a pretty esteemed title contender. And this is why we want to do this podcast, so we could preview what they may be able to do. Obviously, it got delayed because of the Kyrie thing, so we weren't including that. We had previously wanted to, obviously include that, but there's still really a lot of intriguing routes the Mavericks can do to improve defensively, because, initially we had the reason that these options weren't really on the table initially is because, the Mavericks didn't necessarily have the backing of two superstars to basically to just go for it like this. I think that there was a lot more hesitancy to expel first round picks. You would cook up something on Fanspo and include a first rounder going to Utah for Jared Vanderbilt. And it definitely, with a lot of fans, I'm sure, and even me at times, would be met with some cringeworthy expressions, just from the standpoint they're like, oh, like we really want to give that up. But I mean, who cares at this point? I mean, if you guys are still hesitant to expel the tank after this whole Kyrie thing dropped, then I mean, we would probably need to have a discussion on the side as to why that is, because there's just no reason as to why the Mavericks, in my opinion, should be waiting, unless you really think that it's just a certainty that Kyrie signs, just with all the things that he's done in the past. It's just an absolute certainty. Everything is a seamless transition. He signs no matter what, and we're using these first 28 games as a test to decide if we want to bring him back or not. But I'll have you guys know right now that we do not have most of the leverage in this situation. We are pretty strangleholded. But nonetheless, I mean, and do you have anything else, Jaren?
I mean, I think we hashed it all out in these last like 5 hours of podcasting. So.
Yeah, I know. We got all the trades out, and I hope you guys can come to see what we were kind of going for in some of these trades. If you guys have any of your own suggestions and you're listening on YouTube, make sure you send them at us, like what you would do in a trade, because we want to hear a lot more trades, as in the next 48 hours are going to be hectic. So we want to see exactly what all goes down. That's why we want to get this out as fast as we could. But if you haven't already, make sure you're following us at Twitter on mainstream_Mavs. Make sure you are, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and subscribe. And if you are listening on YouTube, make sure you like and comment down below what I literally just asked regarding the trades. That being said, we appreciate you guys for listening this far in the podcast, and we will catch you guys in the next one. Rodrigo will be back to cover the Jazz game for you guys.
Bye-bye.